be chairing the penultimate session of what has been a fantastic day so far. My name is Gemma Taylor. I'm Sustainability Education Sector Lead at MACE. I'll be your host and chair for this session, Energy Efficiency Initiatives, Pathways and Lessons Learned. I'll start by introducing the stellar panel that we have this afternoon. So joining me here on stage, we have Tom Deacon and Matt Isherwood from Barker Associates. We've got Helen Groves from Atkins Realis, Ian Keeling from Cundall, and last but by no means least, our very own client voice, Steph Clark from the Rodian Trust. Now I will point out that Steph didn't know that she was doing this until this morning because she's standing in for somebody who had an emergency, so be kind, and we're really, really welcome for you to be here today. Thank you. So we have an hour, and then the closing session starts. So I'm going to run a tight ship when it comes to timings. Here's the agenda for the session. First, I'm going to give a brief introduction and set the scene for us all. I will then hand over to Matt and Tom, who will speak about delivering green technologies at scale and at pace. I'll then pass on to Ian and Helen to talk about heat decarbonisation and energy pods. I will then host a Q&A session with our client, and then it's over to you guys. So you've been warned. Get some questions ready, please. So, how big is the challenge? It's huge. 32,000 schools, and less than 10% are being rebuilt for our capital programmes. You can do the maths on the rate of retrofit which is required, and we've heard a lot of that today already. So what's the delay? We have a diverse audience here, but many of us are trained and experts in this field. We know what needs to be done. We know the answer. We don't know what the fuss is about, but I always like to switch perspective. So imagine today, if I wasn't an engineer, I was going to be a teacher. So today, I'm a head teacher. What does this sphere look like for me? I wake up, I eat my breakfast, I'm getting ready to go to work. Put the news on. Always a bad idea. Everyone must get to net zero right now. Right, where do I start? So I open up Google. Good old Google, we do a Google search. It says, fix your fabric. Obviously the first one is like symptoms, climate change, result, ultimate death. We ignore that one, and then we go to the next one. So fabric first. Off I go onto the next web page. How much is it going to cost me to fix my fabric? £450,000 for some windows? How am I going to fund that? My windows are just fine. So I leave that thought there for the day, and I go into work and I talk to my deputy head teacher. They've watched the news this morning as well, and they've done their own Google search. Their answer was high temperature heat pumps. Oh gosh. Is that for the win? Is that any cheaper? Who knows? The reality is neither of us are experts in this area, and we're both just trying to run a successful education establishment. So we park it for now and we go about our day. I head to the school hall because my first order of the day is to give an assembly. I actually want to get the kids in order because we've got an Ofsted inspection, but I'm ambushed by them. They've also seen the news. Miss, what are we going to do about the climate agenda? What are we doing about it? They really, really care. They're anxious about it, and so they should be. We really need to do something. So I organise a meeting with our finance director. They go away to do some research, and what they find from their trusty Google search, and there are other providers, by the way, that we can borrow this £450,000, but we have to pay it back for the next 15 years. Only 120% interest. Bargain. What could go wrong? As I ponder on this, I don't want my school in debt. How's that going to look to our trustees and our parents on our books? We could build something magical with that money, and our boiler's just fine. I've got too much to do this week. It's exam season, I've got Ofsted, I've got parents' evening next week. Now's not the time. 6 months pass, I get an email. Great, government released some funding, PSDS. Opens portal. Sorry, you've missed the application window and you're not eligible. 24,000 others beat you to it. Try again next year. Does this sound familiar? Okay, so I'm being theatrical here, but we've heard a lot of these stories today, and I think this is the reality that we're facing when we're putting these situations onto our client bodies, and sometimes we need to step into different perspectives. Everyone wants to do the right thing, but people are scared to do the wrong thing. They've got no idea what good looks like, Are you all with me on how unsettling this situation might be now we're in this perspective? Hopefully our speakers today can help to shed some of the light on these thoughts and challenges and how we can overcome them. They will share some pathways and some of the right ways to go about some of these changes, and maybe some lessons learned too, because we don't want to make the same mistake twice. So with all that being said, I'm going to hand over to our first speakers from Barker Associates, Tom Deacon and Matt Isherwood.
Thanks, Gemma, and good afternoon, everybody. That's a big question, isn't it? I think, as Barker and our team, we're schools and trust specialists, particularly around estates and decarbonisation. And my wife's also a teacher, so I get both perspectives at home and at work, and it really can be quite bamboozling. And I suppose we as a business and the clients, it's great to see some friends and colleagues here today as well that we work with. It is a big question mark, and there's so much information, so much rhetoric, so many examples, so many suppliers, so many contractors, so many theories out there. Is how do we actually help our clients navigate? And I started off with this slide, knowing we were the end session and thinking that might be high risk because, what is a typical journey to net zero? And, we're advisors. I'm a chartered surveyor by background. Our guys are all engineers and carbon specialists, etc. But we forget that we deal with this day in, day out. We are trained, we are experienced in working through this. And so, what I put on the screen here is no different to a lot of what has been spoken about this morning. The importance of gathering data and how mission critical that is, behavioural change and driving the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't use, and how can you do that? How can you reframe your energy contracts so that maybe you look at alternative sustainable sources, etc. But it all requires that advice and that sort of hand on the tiller and experienced support along the way. But actually, I don't see that as the only barrier to this. Funding is obviously a big one. We support a number of clients through PSDS and LCSF, but also looking at self-funded and innovative funding models. We've been fortunate enough to support on the Net Zero Accelerator in that respect as well. Put all that to one side, because there's a lot of people spoken about all those really important things today around data and quick wins and all the stuff that can be done. But actually, from a lessons learned within the clients that we've worked in, and actually just pausing this afternoon and thinking, actually, what I was going to say to this slide needs to be a bit different given what's already been spoken about this morning, is for those clients that we're working with that are mature in this space, that are already moving forward and have done a lot of this already, what's the difference? Well, my take on that is it's around leadership and vision, and I think there was some great discussion points earlier and a lot of focus on action. Let's take some action, and where we've been supporting clients on their journey. Yes, it's about giving them technical advice. Yes, it's about showing them the options and providing them the technical know-how, which we all as professionals are good at. That's our job. That's why we do what we do. But how can we get going on this? And actually, my takeaway from this morning is action comes from somebody or a group of people with strong vision, strong determination to get these things done. I won't go through some of the examples because I know Matt's going to touch on that, but for me it's actually around that vision but backed by action. And yes, there are a multitude of ways to navigate through this complicated route to decarbonisation. There is lots to talk about. This looks very similar actually to something that I think Matt from Inspired Efficiency put up earlier. There's been lots of discussion about this multifaceted approach. But for me, the most important thing here is that senior level sponsorship, that leadership within an organisation, working in partnership with people who can provide that support around this vision, the vision to deliver that strategy, the sponsorship, giving the people within the organisations time and resource, and actually a bit of accountability and latitude to do the right thing in this space. And where we've seen that, it works really well. Because there is just so much to go at. And if you are working in the education space, the chances are your predominant focus will be the education environment. This stuff is, unfortunately, a side hustle, for want of a better phrase, if you're the CEO of a trust. So just wanted to reflect on that, really. I think just the final point for me, and that's around communication, actually. Working with schools as we do all day, every day, it's about making things simple, understandable, not because it's difficult to get to the bottom of, but it's about showing ownership and progress. People like to know that they've started on a journey. They are so far through that journey already. We have seen results from the work we've already done. And some of that may be no-cost, low-cost behavioural change, or it might be embarking on a PV programme. Well, what actually does that? What has that done already to our budget, our carbon footprint, and our educational environment? So this is just some of the stuff we've been working on, just to show that journey. And actually, if you put this in front of people, and you say, well, actually, you're currently on the blue line. If you do your operational adjustments, control low-cost insulation measure, you can drop here, then do your renewables and the quick win stuff. Straight away, you can see the impact you can have. And then the funding in that situation potentially can be recycled. Any excess savings can be recycled, and then you start to deal with some of the harder stuff. But yeah, the funding question is a big one, and that is often on our clients' minds. But that shouldn't stop you from starting something with clear vision and clear direction and a bit of latitude amongst us guys in the estates world who know what we're doing. Let's get on with some stuff. And this is what we've been doing. We've been working on this stuff for over 8 years now. And yeah, it's exciting, but it definitely, clear communication, clear vision, clear strategy at the top level in an organisation really does work, in my experience. So from a lessons learned, I would say, where we've seen it go really well with clients who are making real inroads, it is all down to that vision and drive and focus, time, resource. Thank you. Matt, I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. So, somebody who works for a property professional services company, putting that slide up, is probably working to my own redundancy. Wasn't signed off by my boss, but I thought I'd put it up there anyway. Now, the answer to this was put out in the audience earlier today. And the answer is actually, yes, you can. There is such a thing called renewable guarantees generation of origin. Okay, so electricity. You can get green electricity. And who knew? You can get green gas. You have to scratch my head about that one. Okay, so hydrocarbon, how can you be green and burn a hydrocarbon? Well, you scratch the surface, you can see it's biomethane, so it's an extension in what is an existing carbon cycle, photosynthesis, cast your mind back to school, those biology days, and geography, water cycles and carbon cycles, all that sort of stuff. But also, that getting hold of those contracts is incredibly difficult because there's not many about. The other part of that, the biomethane green gas, is offset from tree planting and what have you. Everybody knows about the sort of grants that are out there at the moment to do your own tree planting. Those of you that have school estates, got hedges around your perimeter fence. You can get grant funding to plant a hedge to help offset your carbon. So those were the spot prices back at the start of May. Clearly there is an uplift from brown, dirty sources through to the green sources. So actually, you do, for your financial sustainability, you have to mitigate those financial uplifts by looking at investments and looking at behaviour change. So just for context, and we all want to take a nugget away from any conference we go to, and if this is your nugget to give a bit of insight into what we're talking about, when we talk about tons of carbon saved, that's how much we're talking about. It's a lot. And I stole that phrase from Alex Green, making the invisible visible. But it's a powerful tool when we reflect back what Tom was saying about inspiring your organisational CEOs, your organisational leaders, to get hold of that vision and make it powerful. So, there's lots of talk. When I first started the investment in solar technology and renewables back in 2016, when my board at the time said, it's not sunny enough. How I laugh now. But we've been talking about it for so long. And there are a few people out there that can walk the course as well as talking. So over the last financial year, with willing partners, trusts, other organisations, Barker managed the delivery of circa 3 live arrays per week. Generated 4 gigawatts of electricity. That's 4 gigawatts that the school sector did not have to buy for the grid, and therefore saved them circa 1.5 million. These are big numbers in 1 year. And remember, of that 1 year, some of those arrays went in April 23, and some of those arrays went in and live in March 24. So it's not a full year in terms of their individual generation. So we talk about the art of the possible to get things done. There it is. More low-hanging fruit. Same period, circa 10 classrooms per day being relamped with LED. With a delivery partner who can deliver at scale and pace, here we go. It is possible. Again, huge reduction in demand from grid, cost savings, and importantly here, when we talk about those levers of power in any organisation, they're the financial ones. We are talking that less than 3 years return on investment. Not to mention 687 huge hot air balloons. So, how do we do this? Again, it comes down to engaging with the client, making sure that we, as their consultant, understands their vision, what their why is. Because if you think about it, at one end of the spectrum you have the financial, return on investment has to be done within 3 years, 7 years, or whatever it might be, and we're going to reduce our energy consumption to make the savings. That's what it's all about. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have the ethical carbon reduction. There is a sweet spot along that spectrum for every single client, and every single client will have a different sweet spot. It's understanding what works for them and what is their driver. Moving forward, procurement. Developing robust, ready-to-go supply chains is critical, and they are out there. The market is maturing with people who are suppliers who know and understand schools and understand that clumping round on top of the roof in a special school with children below, that the slightest thing will trigger, will not work, and they'll be thrown off site pretty quickly. The supply chain are ready and can respond to that. Equally, economies of scale. We heard earlier about the possibility of basket procurement, where you've got a couple of schools who, they want to do some LED, but they can't really do it on their own. Over here, you've got a large trust with the resource to do 30 schools. We'll put them together. So the small guy gets the benefit of the economies of scale of the larger guy. It drives best practice, drives the market delivery. Equally, the delivery part. Really, really important that we put ourselves in the client's shoes and see the impact of their program delivery through their lens. Our LED programs are on night shifts. And the way we describe it It's like the elves and the shoemakers. Team come in at night, do a suite of rooms, gone by the morning. The only difference is they can now see in the building. And a typical primary school takes about a week, 10 days. But key to this is that data-driven decision making, understanding what the impact will be. And it's that impact that we really need to keep front and centre in our minds. Funding, the big elephant in the room. How do we want to do it, how do we pay for this? I think the slide decks are going to be available afterwards, so very quickly on this one. If you can afford to do it yourself from your own cash reserves, that is the best way to do it, because you get the quickest return on investment, you get the bang for the buck straight away. But any model, you will get better than from. You'll start to make an impact. The more you offload that financing to power purchase at one end, taking my consultancy hat on firmly now, working for the voice of the client, make sure you read the terms and conditions of the contract you're signing into. Everybody's in business, there will be different business models out there, their margins will come out of your bottom line. So, no plan, to quote a phrase from the military, ever survives first contact with the enemy. And when you're delivering projects, this is the case too. Going back to that vision that Tom was talking about earlier, having your organisational senior team have clarity of what they want. So starting with that end point in mind, understanding what their political outcome of the project they want to do is nice and clear. Giving political will to the delivery team, the local stakeholders within the school, consultants, the supply chain, all of that, having the political will to get on and do, and giving that leadership and a mandate for action is absolutely critical. Because bureaucracy in schools and across many organisations, everyone is different. Some are far more bureaucratic than others, and that process becomes more burdensome the slower that delivery outcome can be done. But it starts with that political outcome, being clear what you want it to be able to deliver, and then giving that leadership and mandate for action, and you can deliver at scale and at pace. However, there are things that are completely out of your control. First of all, the condition of the roof. Strumming roofs. Anybody got strumming roofs? Anybody know what a strumming roof is? Made of straw, like the Weetabix. Gets wet, falls in. Not good to punch holes in if you put your PV up. So you've got to be aware of the condition of your roof. Most school sector, most academies are held under a leasehold. Landlord being the local authority. You would be amazed how long it takes to get a licence to make alterations from a local authority. Best case, yeah, we don't care, crack on. All the way through to 3 months to turn something around. And constant revisions of full technical detail, when we even haven't got a contractor on board yet. Very difficult. Unlocking those bureaucratic moments. DNO. Anybody got experience with dealing with the district network operators? Everybody's nodding, going, yeah. Early engagement DNO, critical for success in the project delivery. Again, can take up to 16 weeks to get a yes, you can put solar on your roof or EV charge points or change your metering any bloody way. Nightmare. Access. There's no way you come into my school when the children are in session. Also, we've got to wait till the summer holiday? Yes. The elves and the shoemaker can get over that in terms of those internal fit-outs, and that does work. But again, it's being sensitive to the client's demands and the client's aspirations and dressing back to that political outcome. We've already talked about the funding. So there's lots of challenges here, lots of opportunities, lots of lessons learned, but the key message really here is that you need to make sure that whoever you partner with, their business interests align with yours. And that's whether you're procuring your energy, your consultant, your contractor, whoever it might be. Make sure you have alignment with what your political outcome needs to be. That's what we're done. I think we're moving on. Okay.
Thanks, Matt. So, we're going to talk about the other elephant in the room. You mentioned funding, Matt. Heat decarbonisation. You'll have noticed that in Tom's original slide, it was on the right. When we had, for those of you who were at the Net Zero Accelerator session, what was it, 5 weeks ago, whatever it was, heat decarbonisation is the challenge. You know, how do we deal with that? How do we make the financial case for that? You know about the policy landscape, hopefully, you know, having not only sat through most of it today, you know, the number of schools in England and, you know, at the very beginning of the research project that we were carrying out as a team for the energy pods, and when that was first put together, one of the first things that Arcadis did was work out the numbers, and you can see the chart on the right. So obviously, natural gas, as you would expect, you know, what's the energy fuel mix mostly in schools. So some are well ahead with, you know, district heating and grid supply, fantastic, but natural gas still, you know, 41,000 still, you know, very much, and the scale of that is what we've got to move towards. You know, that is the biggest challenge. You know, how do we deal with that? How do we make sure that with all the other things that we absolutely must be doing in terms of the LED, in terms of the PVs, absolutely, those are watertight business cases now. But how do we deal with the other elements? I think it's important to go back to what Gemma was talking about at the beginning. You know, when we're having these conversations with schools, it's about keeping it in perspective. You know, and as Alex Green and John Dewsbury said this morning, the decarbonisation agenda absolutely is important, but it's got to be in the context of, you know, creating future leaders in sustainability, in biodiversity, in tackling overheating, in the excellence in education, which is the prime driver of our schools, and making sure that we are assisting them within that. You know, we're not hindering them, and we're not frightening the schools into doing something which is a knee-jerk reaction, you know, particularly with heat decarbonisation. So it's not just about the gas, it's about understanding where that leaves us. On the one hand, we know we need to decarbonise the heat. On the other hand, we need to be strategic to do it in a structured way that isn't going to break the bank. So you've heard lots of different presentations today, and in some parts of the sector, you know, okay, it's about being leaner with our space, and that's how we're going to justify the higher operating costs that go into electric-driven heating in whatever guise it might be, is going to take us. That's not really an option for schools. We can't just make them smaller and be more efficient with space. We don't have that luxury. We don't have, as Matt was saying, the option to leave all the existing systems and put green gas in them. There's simply not enough supply there to be able to make that work. But at the same time, what we want to emphasise today, and what Ian will be talking about, is to say, don't rush into it now. There's another option. You know, there are other options within it, and whilst, yes, we want to remove the fossil fuels, don't feel that the knee-jerk reaction of we must do it now. We wake up in the morning, we hear the news, and oh right, so I've got to decarbonise my heating. So yes, I got this flyer in the post the other, or email more likely. I got this flyer by email that said, oh yeah, we can do. You don't need to do anything to your fabric, and we can decarbonise. High-temperature heat pumps, new technologies, brilliant. We can solve all your problems. But knowing full well that in a year's time, that's going to cripple the school's finances, because right now we're not set up to be able to deal with that. So don't assume that you've got to do it all now. I think that's the message that we want to make sure that we're giving, that there's always options. And so Ian's going to give a more detailed summary about the heat pumps, and then we'll come back to a summary of the energy pods work that we do.
Good afternoon. So I think one thing we've learned today is that the net zero game is not about just reducing fossil fuels at all cost, but when it comes to heat decarb, it's a pretty big deal. And at the moment, to be totally honest, in existing schools, we're not doing a great job. And I argue the reason is that we don't yet have a framework that describes how schools can periodically decarbonise over time. So we have a scenario where a boiler breaks. We have this great opportunity to intervene and improve efficiency, but actually what we do is we simply just take that boiler away, replace it like for like, nice and quick, nice and cheap, but real dirty. And most importantly, it doesn't move that school on its journey to 2050 net zero carbon. So we need to think a little bit more strategically about how we approach the question. So I'm not going to touch really much on this slide because the Barker team have highlighted the low-hanging fruits really well, and I thought actually the second session this morning in here was absolutely fantastic, talking about what the decarbonisation opportunities are out there that are commercially viable, and there is funding there available for schools. Unfortunately, as Helen said, the heat decarb is a much tougher challenge. I think as I see it, there's two reasons. First, it's a little bit more technical, it's more complicated, and the payback's just not there. I wish I could say that heat decarb's going to give you a 3-year payback like LEDs is. It's not. Chances are it probably won't give you a payback. The reason to do it is not cost and money, it's about carbon. But one of the big lessons that Helen and I have learned working with the DFE over the last 2 or 3 years, and the challenge we want to set is when we're speaking with clients, or perhaps you are a client working with a contractor or a consultant, there's a few key questions we need to ask ourselves. The first is, what's reasonable? There's simply not the time and emotional energy to solve all of these problems right now. What's affordable? Even if you did have the time, the funding is not available. And what's suitable? Our schools just simply aren't set up for a net zero carbon future yet. One of the big challenges, forgetting about time and money, one of the big challenges about heat decarbonisation is incompatibility of temperatures. So a typical boiler in winter will be operating at temperatures of excess of 70 degrees. That's the water going through radiators. Decent heat pump will give you 40 to 50 degrees. Our schools are just not ready. So what are some of the answers? So what's reasonable? We can make some behavioural changes at the school level, and again, we've heard quite a bit today about what those might look like. I thought it was really interesting in the second session where someone pointed out that the boiler was working on Christmas Day. These are some of the behavioural changes we can make that really drive meaningful change right now. It's not going to cost you anything. So what's affordable? Well, we can start to improve the fabric of our building. That's improving insulation in walls and roofs, replacing windows. Okay, that's going to be a bit of an upfront capital cost. It'll probably hurt a little bit in terms of disruption to curriculum, but what it will do is reduce your overall energy need, which will reduce operational cost, and it will insulate you against risk of increasing costs as schools move from cheap gas essentially to more expensive electric-driven technology. And then what's suitable? We can start to get our heating systems ready. There will be condition-led scenarios where radiators, pumps, pipes, or even entire heating systems need to be replaced now as a result of condition. If you're going to do it, replace them in a way that makes them compatible with future low-carbon, low-temperature heat sources. So before we move on to a very quick overview of what the solution might look like, and more of a cautionary tale, really, which is be wary of the simple answer. This is not a simple solution. We heard this morning that it's the cost of decarbonising the estate is 80 to 100 billion. Anything that's going to cost us that amount of money, it's not going to be simple. One of the big simple answers that we often hear about are high temperature heat pumps. So why they're painted as a simple solution is because high temp heat pumps can mimic the sort of temperatures you get in a boiler system. So no need to upgrade radiators, no need to change your windows, no need to improve your insulation on your walls. Just take out your boiler, plug in your nice lovely high temperature heat pump and just crack on. It'd be great if it was that simple. We strongly feel that's the wrong solution. Firstly, they're really expensive to install. Heat pumps are not cheap, they're far more expensive than boilers. High temperature heat pumps are more expensive to install compared to low temperature heat pumps. Someone's got to pay for that. We're all going to pay for that. And expensive to operate. If you look to integrate higher cost electric driven heat pumps before you start looking at all of your fabric interventions, before you really drive down your energy need, you are just going to significantly increase your operational costs overnight. And then perhaps a little softer one, but equally important, it doesn't incentivise change. If you've got a technology ready for you, what apart from trying to make savings on your operational costs, what's the incentive to improve your fabric? It's just not there. So what we think is a more optimised approach, and in a moment Helen will introduce a video that goes into a more framework approach of how this could be applied, is a bivalent system. So anyone who's not aware of the term, bivalent system is essentially just a heating system that incorporates two heat technologies. So the one you'll likely find in school settings is a boiler and some form of heat pump, probably air source or ground source, more likely air source. So this is where schools are, this is where we want them to get to. The problem is you've got to do a whole load of stuff to get a school from here to here. We don't have the time, we don't have the money, and actually we don't need to do it all right now. There's no immediate urgency to do it all. What we don't want to do is we don't want to make rash decisions that get schools from here to here, make the wrong decisions in getting them there. So essentially how it works is your boiler, it maintains your system performance. Your school still has the option to take use of a higher temperature heat source. So in the depth of winter, when you need that high temperature, you can still use the boiler, maintain thermal comfort for staff and students, and then during the mid-season, as the external conditions allow, your boiler is able to turn off, your heat pump comes on, and they share the annual load. And so you get that sort of upfront, immediate decarbonisation of your heat. The idea is that this approach gives you the flexibility. So we start off with both, and then as a school improves their fabric, makes behavioural changes, optimises their controls, they gradually wean themselves off the boiler. The idea is that by 2050, you don't need the boiler at all, and you're on to a net zero carbon future. And I'll pass back. Thank you.
So some of you will have already heard us talk about energy pods at previous conferences. We're not going to dwell on the background of it, but there's a whole series of consultants you can see that we were all involved within that, and it gave us the opportunity to, I suppose, to step away and say, okay, if this was at scale and at pace, what does that mean? How could you do something? This is still, as you saw from John's list this morning, this is still on the kind of it's being tested option. We haven't proved the financial case yet. We're still working on that, to see if that were possible. But to make sure that we don't want the schools to be left behind, those that aren't, in the system at the moment for a refurb or a rebuild, or even, other sources of funding that we've been talking about today. If this were available to schools to put in this bivalent system, what might it look like? And that's essentially what we've done.
Two key learning points really that we've learned over the past 2 or 3 years and want to pass on is don't feel the stress to do everything now. You do not need to do everything now. Develop a strategic roadmap. The worst thing you can do is allow that panic to make you do the wrong thing. It might seem like the right thing now, but it might be the wrong thing. Concentrate on making, meaningful changes to the way you behave, the way your site works, and don't be forward thinking this is a really simple, easy thing to solve.
Thank you. So some really interesting learning points from both of those presentations, as I'm sure you will agree. So get thinking about some questions. I'll just do a Q&A with Steph from our client's perspective, and then I will pose a few questions to the panels myself before handing over to you guys. So you've had your second warning now. Okay, hi Steph. So, as we've said, two very interesting presentations. First of all, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your day job, please?
Yes, so I am the Area Estates Lead for Meridian Trust, and I'm day-to-day operational, effectively looking after site teams and being the link between site teams, head teachers, and also the director and the board. So where the decisions were being made, I'm kind of not at that level. I work in delivering the programmes. So the programmes that are coming on board now that we're working with Barkers, I work hands-on delivering with those and delivering those programmes across the schools.
So a very busy day job, and so this is side hustle, as I think you described it, Tom. So can you tell us a little bit more about the work and support the decarbonisation you've been doing at Meridian Trust?
So as a whole, we have applied for SALEX funding recently, so I think 5 schools are almost complete within the SALEX funding. So we've had a number of solar panels put on those buildings and air source heat pumps. Most of the solar panels are live now, and again we're struggling with a few issues around DNO for the air source, but they will be going live. We've also been working with Barkers and recently introduced the new energy dashboards, which has been incredible with regards to sitting down face to face with a head teacher saying we need to up your utility budget by $250,000, which we had to do last year and the year before with the rise in energy costs. So the dashboard has been a really good tool, so we can show you've got a letting at this point, but you shouldn't have this much electricity going out the building, for example. So, and bringing in new behaviours for their staff, and a teacher doesn't shut a window or turn a light off, and that on the ground, it sounds really stupid, but is a real big challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that having that kind of, we've been speaking a lot about data today, and I think that data doesn't turn into action until you can sort of use it as information. And so I think having access to that dashboard, would you say that it's helping you overcome some of those challenges of actually getting action from your senior leaders? Oh,
absolutely. Our schools run on a way where there are executive principals as well. So executive principals have a cluster of schools within the directorate, and where you have one very proactive head teacher and perhaps one not so proactive head teacher. I gave the example earlier on where we had a primary school where the head turned all the heating off until December, and people went in with coats, but you could really clearly see on the dashboard there was next to no energy use at that point. So they're also being challenged by their executive principal. So it's working really well in almost a competitive stage as well with those heads.
And do you get the kids involved in looking at that data at all?
Not necessarily data. We do have an initiative called Captain Carbon. It works in line with the environmental policy of the trust. However, it's had more of a positive impact at the primary school level. And it's just about those nil cost initiatives, turning the lights off, recycling, turning your laptop off, and all those kind of bits. So, and there is bits and pieces around the children were involved in designing his outfit and things like that. So yeah, Captain Carbon does feature at the back of all the toilets, flushing the chain and a half flush and all those kind of things.
I love that, Captain Carbon. Yeah. Okay, so can you outline maybe one key opportunity and one key challenge which you face as a client in the current landscape and climate policy?
I think we spoke about this earlier on. I think the big one is the finance, and I think that's an opportunity and also a challenge. We've been very lucky that some of our schools have been through the SALEX, so funding has been there, and obviously that's a great opportunity. The challenge now is, obviously now we're working with Barkers, we've got 2 phases running out for solar across the sites, and that's been, I think the challenge is the funding with that. We've got a very proactive COO, and she can see the benefits, so we're branching out in 2 phases. but obviously it's coming from school reserves and trust reserves to fund that, and it's saying where that payback can come, and looking at the positive, I suppose, is that the money that could be saved can be put back into schools, and the estate, so perhaps anything that moves forward doesn't come from SCAR funding, or I think we worked a figure out earlier on, Matt, where a £20,000 saving just on one school and what we currently pay for electricity for their PV actually could fund a TA. And the way schools are going now, with the SEND need being greater across all schools and more TAs being seen across our schools as a whole, that's suddenly a TA that you wouldn't have had.
That's amazing. And just like, Matt was saying, 1 tonne of carbon is a hot air balloon. Putting it into perspective for you, some saving is another TA, which really takes the burden off the staff in the school.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. So finally then, I guess, do you have any future plans in mind for Meridian? Like, what's next?
So we're currently in phase 1. We have a east and west divide of the A1. And so phase 1, I think it covers both sides of the A1, to be fair. We then move on to phase 2. That's already in progress. I think phase 1, the contractors have already made contact with all our sites, and works are kind of starting and happening. As they start progressing, phase 2 then goes out, and then we move on to phase 3 and phase 4. So I know they're looking at the bigger picture of air source heat pumps, ground source pumps, and REGO as well. So I know that the trust wanted to be as close to net zero by 2035, but it's just that moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you didn't need to look at your notes once.
No, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steph. Okay, so I will pose a few questions to the panel, and then, as I say, I will reach out to the audience. So, Ian, on average, how much hybrid performance is needed, and is it feasible that over the next 25 years, all of the upgrades necessary will be made to make it an air source heat pump only solution?
Second part of the question, a little easier to answer, so I'll start with that. So we've done, was it 10 case studies as part of the Energy Pods pilot, and can't take credit for this, it was Erkin's team. We did some assessments of energy and fabric improvements and what that would likely to do. It was a desktop study, but in essentially the Energy Pods approach is designed in a way that the air source heat pumps, their output is capped at about 45 watts per metre squared. It will never do any more than that for you. The task is, can all of these schools that are performing far worse than that, can they get down to that level of efficiency sometime over the next 25 years? The desktop studies we've done across those 10 sites shows that actually with commercially viable fabric improvements that are viable today, so forget any potential innovations we make in the next 10 or 15 years, that 45 watts per metre squared figure looks pretty achievable. So confident, and we've done our own assessments, not formally as part of the project, that came to similar conclusions. So yeah, confident. First part of the question, what proportion is doing what? I don't know. The simple answer. There are a lot of variables across individual sites. 2 in particular will be the inclement weather on that site. So a school in north of Scotland will behave very, very differently to one in the southeast of England. That obviously changes the profile of heat used in the school, and how efficient is the school now. If you've got a school that perhaps was built, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, that is having a boiler replaced, just part of planned maintenance, so it's actually performing pretty well. They don't all perform well just because they're 15 years old. That might actually be able to deliver quite a decent portion of its annual load through the heat pumps. But if you have one that's 50 years old that is really leaky and it's barely got any insulation, it's single glazed, chances are you're going to be relying on your boiler for the lion's share of the year. But there are too many variables across individual sites for me to give you a
and I think that just
percentage.
goes to show, like, in terms of the framework being provided is so important, because you can meet that building at any moment.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So Matt, it was in red on your triangle and you mentioned it quite strongly. The DNO, we had some scraps with them along the way. Sometimes on some of the new schools, we've got lots of PVs going on the roofs, DNO's capping the export. Have you faced any of those challenges on any of your PV schemes?
Yes. When the DNO caps the export, people who don't perhaps aware of what that means is the DNO will presume that there may be an occasion when everything on that particular site is switched off and that there is 100% of what is generated is exported to grid. The local grid infrastructure might not be robust enough to take that amount of exported generation. So you're not going to upgrade the local grid. So they put an export limit on how much you can export. And so that's when, it depends on where it is in the country and also where it is in towns and cities, etc. If there is, if you're in a state where there has been lots of PV installed already on residential housing, then the local grid might well be at capacity for any further local export. So whilst the school might want to go, our why is maximise our carbon saving, therefore we maximise our electricity generation, which will maximise their export, they won't be permitted to. Equally, rowing it back slightly, it's finding that sweet spot, because back in the days when you had a feed-in tariff of 25-30 pence per kilowatt, great, incentivise the market, that's now gone. There is the smart energy guarantee, but that's, Ofgem will say that's as a minimum needs to be 0 pence, but it could be typically about 4 to 6 pence or something like that. So if you're generating and exporting, you're almost subsidising the grid from your own capital reserve, and that doesn't sit right. So it's finding that sweet spot of what's right for the site and the drivers of why the school want to do it in the first place.
So in that situation, do you kind of stop at that sweet spot, or then do you start looking at batteries? Or
again, technology is rapidly moving because we are in a volatile marketplace, and that drives innovation. Battery technology is forever improving. We've seen the sort of the pod of battery storage. We've seen minibuses being used as a mobile battery that discharges back when the children are being bussed around. So battery technology will come. Again, it's the affordability of the capital investment.
Thank you. And Tom, for yourself, how do we overcome the challenge of funding the decarb work which follows if the quick wins are using all of the savings made in energy?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the elephant in the room, isn't it? How do you fund heat decarbonisation? I'm a big fan of the energy pod type solution, but it needs to that is still going to come with some capital investment requirement, and therefore, there are lots of barriers, but that shouldn't mean you shouldn't be getting on with some of those quick wins now, but being prudent with the savings that are generated. So if you can ring fence those in some way to help some of those other projects become affordable, then it won't cover it, I don't think, but it will certainly go some way to bridging the financial viability situation. But I also think it's about looking at mixed mode funding as well. So there was focus from various parts of the day on building fabric, and I'm a building surveyor by background, right? So fabric first that's building surveying at its core, isn't it? But again, if you look purely on return on investment for a window replacement project, if you were just doing it to save energy, you wouldn't do it. So I think it's about dovetailing some of the funding that's there already, whether that's SIF or SCA, whether that's PSDS type funding, etc. But I think the secret to it is probably a call to the policymakers around harmonising that the funding opportunities so that they do dovetail together, and I think that's where you can maximise the opportunity. You know, we're regularly working with schools who want to bid for SIF for boiler replacements, and then want to put a PSDS application in, but the two don't align. The timescales are not right. The funding allocation is, you almost have to, the stars need to align. You have to win both to be able to progress with your project, and that's not great. But the other issue as well is around policy making is the bivalent solution, which allows the phasing out of gas over time, that allows you to replace your windows, do your fabric improvements when it's appropriate to do so, probably more condition-led than energy-led actually, given the returns on investment. But at the moment, the current PSDS guidelines don't allow for new fossil fuel type bivalent systems, so you would have to use what's there already, or in some instances, we've got one project on the go at the moment where we're using electrode boilers with an air source heat pump to get that to work. But we've had to put a mountain of PV on that school in order to offset the operating costs, and that squeezed underneath the threshold for Salix and got funded. So I think the key to this is mixed mode. I think it's about, you know, but also aligning those policies, and unfortunately that's outside of our direct control. But I think the more people who raise these issues around that, I think that could potentially create a unified funding landscape where some of this actually might be more doable.
Yeah, it's key. It's that collaboration is key. I mean, there's a mix of individuals in this room today, some policymakers, some deliverers. So we're all listening intently, and hopefully we can all play our part. Helen, I was going to ask you a question, but I'm keen to get out to the audience. Is that okay?
Right. Yep.
Perfect. Is there any questions from the audience? Okay, we'll take one at the back here, and then one at the... go for this one first. Yeah. Which one? Just here.
Thank you. Paul Stewart from Plymouth Gas. I've just been interested today that we're all looking at measures to decarbonise and measuring that. It's interesting that nobody's mentioned about capturing the carbon associated with carrying out these works, particularly deep retrofit. Should there be an emphasis on the contractors to capture or record the amount of carbon associated with these works to justify the means? Because at the moment, particularly with some of these heavy deep retrofit projects, the amount of carbon associated in the procurement side, the supply chain, everything coming from China, how do we know that some of the solutions are not worse than the measures that you're trying to design out?
Anybody want to tackle that one, embodied carbon?
Yeah, I can jump in, I guess. I think part of the problem there is that at the moment we're not talking about carbon in the round of whole life carbon, are we? Right now we're talking about operational carbon. I think it's a step change. You know, we've only been talking about carbon realistically, you know, not that long. So we couldn't have gone from not caring about it at all to understanding operational and embodied. Embodied carbon, particularly in my discipline for building services, it's really, really difficult to assess embodied carbon in the building services industry. A little bit easier in things like structural engineering, because you have fewer components. Air handling unit, you might have 1,000 components. How do you calculate that? So I think we're in the process of stepping towards a more whole life carbon approach. I think you're right. I think eventually the DFE's bound to mandate a whole life carbon metric, bound to happen, and we might find, I mean, the history of engineering is littered with ideas that looked great at the time but ended up not being so good. So we might find that actually, for the last 5 years we've been doing things that perhaps weren't the best idea. I mean, CHP is a great example that I always bring up in these conversations. It was great, combined heat and power was great 10 years ago. It's absolutely shocking now. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think that answer will come out of the woodwork in the next 5 years, I think.
I think the other element to add to that, and I know that we have to wrap up now, so I will do, it's talking about it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. If you're going to start in 2049, you're going to have to sprint to the finish line. But if you start now, you can do your interventions alongside your condition. So your embodied carbon is going to be eaten away as you would anyway. So it's about planning your journey, and it's about understanding you don't have to race to net zero now. As long as you have a plan in place, then we can meet you at checkpoints along that plan and make sure that you're on that journey. So with all that being said, big round of applause for the panel this afternoon, and also to Steph for joining us on Last Motion.